And we are live, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to episode 52 of the Sling'N podcast. I'm TJ.
And I'm Kent.
And joining us tonight is the well-known, moderately respected beacon of all things awesome when it comes to firearms instruction. Dare I say, the instructor of instructors, Tom Givens. Tom, welcome to the show, man.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Absolutely. So, Tom, as we like to start off every episode, we like to give our guests an opportunity to introduce themselves. So please, Tom, tell the folks at home and those listening on the podcast, who the hell are you?
Okay. Let's see. Started out, did a number of years in law enforcement, both street patrol and investigations many years ago, back in the 70s and 80s. While I was doing that, went through all of the institutional schools. I'm a NRA law enforcement firearms instructor, tactical shooting instructor, then through the FBI instructor school, a bunch of other what I call institutional schools over those years. Been involved in competitive shooting most of my life. Shot on the rifle team in high school, shot PPC early in the police career. Was involved in setting up IPSC, which later became USPSA, won several state and regional championship titles in that game. Being a slow learner, I was involved in setting up IDPA. My IDPA member number is A00008, so it gives you an idea when I got involved in that. Spent 2 years on the board of directors of that. Won a couple of state and regional championship titles in that game. So basically, in one form or another, I've been around competition for decades. Written six published textbooks and part of 4 other people's published books, about 150 magazine articles in Combat Handgun, SWAT Magazine, American Handgun, Soldier Fortune, et cetera. Work as an expert witness on firearms training in both state and federal courts all over the U.S. For about 5 or 6 years, I was on the masthead of SWAT Magazine. My job every month was to go to a different school and observe how they did things and audit how they accomplished their job. Work that stuff into my programs, which is pretty much a dream job for a trainer. Started teaching people professionally in 1975 as a sideline, but went full-time as a trainer in 1996. So been doing that for 24 years now, full-time. So I'm thinking seriously about making a career out of it. I haven't decided yet. And that's about it. All-around nice guy. And nowadays on the road, a little bit more than I like to be, actually, about 30 to 35 road trips a year. Last year I spent 150 nights in hotels, so it gives you an idea of my travel schedule. So right now you caught me at home in Florida, where I'm kind of chilling for another week before I head out for another marathon session on the road.
Outstanding. Well, sir, I have to admit that you are probably the most qualified guest that we have had. So thank you for giving us some of your time and helping us to reach our audience and provide them what I'm sure will be great content, at least from your part.
I don't know about anything, but I work at it pretty hard.
Fair enough. Kent, before we dive in with Tom here, what's been new with you, man?
Raising a baby and teaching gun classes, trying not to get fired from my day job as a sales hack in the Corona economy. Yeah, just dodging Antifa one block at a time over here in Pennsylvania. That's all. We've got 5 more classes before the end of the year. GreedMountainDefense.com/training if you want to get in on something. And privates are always available. That's what's going on with me. What about you, man? Have you have they let you out of your basement yet?
For a little bit, yeah. The last 2 weeks have been utter hell. But with that being said, we're making a lot of really positive progress on this. The current fire that I'm trying to put out. So all things considered, I count my blessings, man. I count my blessings.
So for those of you that don't know, TJ's company is in charge of all the digital voting machines on the planet, and the Russians got in. Is that a fair? That's a good lie. That's a good lie, is it not?
I'm waiting for my phone to explode now.
I know.
But yeah.
No, that's actually not what TJ does at all. But it is IT related, so close enough for government work, which he doesn't do anymore. I'm convinced
he won't be doing any after this.
I'm convinced my best friend and my podcast partner is actually a CIA spook, and nobody tells me.
No, not anymore.
See? That's what I'm saying. They'll never answer the question.
Here's your pro tip of the day. If somebody tells you they're a secret agent, they're not.
Right.
Right. Yeah. Well, that's my problem. I just keep telling people he is, so it works fine.
Yeah,
So,
you can usually weed out the qualifications that somebody has when they start talking about them, right? Like if it's not well known or not at least easily discoverable on its own merit, probably bullshit. Just throwing that out there, because God knows I've come across my fair share of phonies, fakers, and frauds in my career. So
your career in? Nope, not going to do it. Okay.
Podcasting.
Not going to do it. So, real quick, for those playing the home game and you were paying attention, you know that Tim Kelly from Apache Solutions and myself recently attended Tom's 3-day instructor development course out there in Ohio. And what's that?
Just barely squeaked by.
Right, yeah, exactly right. It was nice of you to lower the bar so that we could jump up over. I really do appreciate that. That being said, I had some takeaways from class that he and I were talking about and all that. And I figured the heck with it. We got Tom coming on the show, so we might as well bring some of those things up without giving away the farm. Go take the class. But certainly there were some interesting topics and there were some things that really stood out to me. One of them, Tom, was the level of attention and effort that you put into your statistics and your general record keeping on defensive use of force, your students' involvement in defensive use of force, the overall likelihood of average Joe citizen to be involved in some sort of violent physical encounter. It was refreshing to see so much data behind. You hear a lot of this stuff, right? You go to a presentation, you go to a class, and a guy will throw some shit up on the screen and then move on. You went, 3 or 4 levels deep and explained to instructor candidates where to go find this stuff for ourselves, which, P.S., those of us who were paying attention went and did later, and it was quite astounding. You want to share some of where that came from and why it's so important to you?
Yeah. The first problem is your typical person has been misled their entire life by the media and other sources. Violent crime in this country is played down a lot. It's a lot worse than most people realize it is. One of the things that makes me actually laugh is when somebody says they odds me need my self-defense pistol or 1 in a million. As you know now, that's not exactly right. There's a lot more violent crime than is admitted. If the news actually tried to report all violent crime, that's all it would be. It'd just be a long listing of crimes one after another. So people are kind of lulled into a false sense of security a lot of times. They think, for instance, I live in a nice neighborhood. Well, guess where people go to commit crimes? They go to nice neighborhoods where there's money, there's cash, there's credit cards, there's cameras, there's electronics, there's guns, there's all the things, jewelry, there's all the things they want to turn into money. So that's a fallacy. Another fallacy is that all violent crime occurs with gang member, and that sort of thing. There's an awful lot of stranger violence in this country. People completely unconnected. So I think it's one of the things we have to do is try to educate newer people in this field on what the actual threat level is, so that they have a better understanding of what they need to do to prepare, what do they need to prepare for, what types of violent crime are prevalent, what are the conditions they occur under, so that people can realistically prepare for them. If the average person had any idea how much crime there actually is, they'd want some politicians' heads, which is the primary reason the politicians suppress that information to the degree they do. One of the sources of information we talked about in the class is the FBI Uniform Crime Report, which the media uses as their Bible every year for the index of crime in the country. And as you now know, that's a very distorted source. It's a voluntary system. Almost everybody thinks that police agencies are required to report crimes to the FBI, and that's where the UCR, the Uniform Crime Report, comes from every year. And that's not the case at all. There are 18,000 police agencies in the U.S. And when layman thinks of the police department, they think of the Chicago Police Department, the New York Police Department, Los Angeles Police Department, with tens of thousands of officers. The reality is the typical officer in this country works for a department of 6, 10, 12 people. And a department of that size, there is nobody to sit at a desk and do statistics and send them to the federal government. So the majority of smaller agencies don't even report this crap to the FBI. And a lot of the larger agencies don't, because it makes their city look bad. So they don't report it. It's a purely voluntary system. So the fact is, when you look at violent crime in the UCR, you're only getting a fragment of it because the majority of it's not reported to them. They're giving you an accurate report of what was reported to them, not to what actually happened. And there's a huge difference between what happens and what's reported to the UCR system. The UCR, for instance, the last couple of years has had about 12,500 murders a year. People who study that for a living will tell you the actual number is probably closer to 40,000. That's a huge disparity. 12,500 to 40,000 is a pretty big number. Same thing goes for aggravated assault. There's not even a place in the UCR for attempted murder anymore. I had the guy, one of the guys that runs the Miami-Dade Metro Jail in class last year. I asked him how many people got locked up today. I think his number was about 4,800. That's how many got locked up for aggravated assault. It's about 2,600, a little over half of them. So how many got locked up for attempted murder is 0. And that's typical around the country. As I said, there's not even a block for that in the UCR anymore. But most people have no idea what aggravated assault means. Okay? As you learned in class, aggravated assault actually means somebody tried to kill you. They just weren't very good at it. And you survived. And it's according to the FBI's definition, it's an unlawful assault involving a deadly weapon or serious injury to the victim. So in other words, somebody tried to kill you. Well, there are roughly 1 million of those every year in the U.S. That's one for every 300 people. That's not 1 in a million. And that's just that one crime, and that's just in 1 year. So when you take a more in-depth look at violent crime, you look at some of the sources I gave you, the Bureau of Justice Statistics, the state-run organizations like the TBI in Tennessee. In Tennessee, let's just use an example. Every police agency, including campus organizations and everybody else, are required by law to report every single crime to the TBI, not to the FBI, to the TBI, Tennessee Bureau of Investigation. And they put out a very detailed report every year. And if your state doesn't do that, the TBI numbers will be different because of the population differences from state to state, but the percentage of crime per population is pretty standard across the country. So to give you an idea of just how many violent crimes per capita there actually are, which is the number I'd be interested in. So when you start looking into those sources, you find out there's a hell of a lot more violent crime than you've been led to believe in the past. And the odds of needing a gun are not 1 in a million, they're 1 in much smaller, probably a couple hundred.
It's interesting to see people react differently to the relatively new 24/7 news cycle, right? Where you just you pick up this dummy device and you go, "Oh my God, look what's happening in XYZ."
Right.
And the minute that information cycles and ends up right in front of your face because you can't get away from it, now all of a sudden we're getting these, we're getting phone calls and emails and text messages. Hey, can you teach me how to shoot a gun? I need to go buy a gun. I need to get a gun. Help me get a gun, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. That being said, without picking on your age, you've been around a while.
Yeah.
Have you seen anything like this? Is there any precedent in the last several decades in the trading industry and gun industry?
Yeah. People are, and when I say people, I mean people in general. People in general are reactive, not proactive. They don't say, this is a perilous world. There are hazards I need to control. You can't eliminate risk. It's not possible. But what we can do is minimize risk, mitigate risk, manage risk, and that's what this is all about. I can't teach you anything that will eliminate risk, but I can teach you how to manage your risks and make them far less hazardous to you. Make your odds a lot better, you might say. But as I said, most people are not proactive. They don't sit down and say, okay, what are the risks that I'm going to encounter? What can I do to mitigate that? Until something happens to somebody they know they're connected with in some manner. Violent crime is purely imaginary. Even the ones they see on the screen, they see it on the screen, that makes it like a movie, and it's imaginary to them. Now, when the next door neighbor gets robbed in the driveway and shot, that's a big deal. I need a gun. Lady in the Bridge Club gets raped. That's a big deal. I need a gun. So we see this quite often. the most recent example I could give you was right after 9/11, 19 years ago now. The gun and ammunition pipeline was emptied out just like it is today, up to that degree. I had an FFL shop at that time, and I can tell you there was nothing available for a while after that. And the reason was, oh my God, they're flying airliners into tall buildings. I must go buy a pistol. Now, that makes absolutely no sense.
Right.
Is an example of that reactive mindset rather than proactive mindset. So right now they're saying, oh, geez, there are riots in the streets. 911 calls are going completely unanswered. The police are completely overwhelmed. I must go buy a gun. Well, it was like that a month before the riot started. You just didn't know it. In most big cities, you're kidding yourself if you think 911 is going to bring you any kind of quick response. It may bring you a response, but it ain't going to be anytime soon. So the reality is nothing has changed. It's just that the awareness has changed and being reactive. Once you stick it in somebody's face, they go, oh, geez, now I better go buy a gun. And people now, you got a far, far smaller percentage of the population now that has any familiarity at all with guns until they make that sudden decision, oh, I better go buy one. But we got people who are accustomed to buying a device and being taught how to use it or do this and do, various other things they have to get some education to use. So I think we see a little bit more of a swing toward, I bought a gun now, I got to find somebody to show me how to use it than you would have, say, 20, 30 years ago when they said, well, my dad taught me how to shoot a gun when I was 10 out of meat class. One night, two gun sight instructors, two high-end military instructors, and my wife were all having a steak. And conversation turned to what do we really hate to hear on the range, what just ruined their day. Unanimously, we all said, why hell I grew up around guns. But the reality is today, a lot of younger people didn't grow up around guns. In fact, they'd never seen one before. We get people in police, never touched a firearm until they get to the academy. And so we have a different mindset now than we had, say, 30, 40 years ago. So we got reactive people running out and buying an instrument that they don't know how to work. So there's probably a somewhat larger percentage of them willing to say, now I got to get somebody to show me how to work this thing. Not so much because they want to be competent with it. It's just that I think it's kind of the mindset of, I buy a new gizmo, somebody's got to show me how to work it. So I think you'll see a lot more interest in training. I know everybody I know is booked up pretty far out right now for entry-level type training.
So as a follow-on to that, William Kelly in the chat asks, how long after 9/11 did it take for things to level back out, to your recollection?
Well, I think it was about half a year, but that was a different circumstance. That was a very brief happened and it's over with type moment. It took a couple of weeks to figure out, okay, that's it. It's not going to be anymore. That's not what we're seeing this year. We had the COVID thing created enough of a panic, but then we had all these riots. And you might as well call them that. They're riots, they're not protests. When you burn buildings down, that's not a protest. When you kill cops, that's not a protest. Those are riots. So I think it's kind of, I know you guys don't remember 1968, but I do. I think you're going to see a real pendulum swing and respond to that. People are, I think, starting to get fed up with it. Especially, first off, you had people's small businesses closed by COVID and then burned down by the rioters. This is affecting the middle of America, the people who actually make the country run more than anybody else. It's not affecting the rich fat cats. It's not affecting people on government assistance. It's affecting people who have got their life and their sweat in a small business that's now either been shuttered by the government or burned down by the leaders. I think you're going to find it. They're going to reach a point where they're going to say enough's enough. But I think that's probably driving some of the interest in training right now.
I've seen a particular uptick in folks between 50 and 70 of what you would consider to be the opposite political leanings, right? Very, very, very left-wing, affluent, not quite millionaires, but close kind of people. And I've never reached an audience like that previously in my 7 now years in business. It's been interesting to see just who's willing to make the leap. What I will say about those people is it mirrors something you just said. They're used to being taught things. They're used to hiring help to learn whatever it might be.
Golf pro, tennis pro, whatever. Yeah.
Exactly, a good parallel. So that being said, one of the things that really struck home that had people in the class, texting their loved ones and so forth, and maybe having to walk out for a drink break real quick that wasn't really a drink break, was some of the auditory illustrations of what happens when 911 takes, what was it, 17 minutes or something like that on the
in the really grisly one you're referring to is actually only about 5 minutes, but 5 minutes is a very long time.
Might as well have been that might as well have been an eternity.
Yeah, according to the Justice Department, the typical interaction with a violent criminal, whether it's a robbery, carjacking, whatever, it's less than 90 seconds. And how the hell are you going to get a cop in 90 seconds? Just the process takes longer than that, much less driving where they are to where you are. Just the process of taking and handling the incoming call, if you could call them while it's going on in the first place. If you'll recall, we had a career police officer in your class, like about a 30-year guy, and I asked him how many times had he actually arrived in time to actually interrupt a violent felony in his 30-year career, and he thought about it a second. I think he said 3.
Yeah. And he took some time to think about it too.
Yeah. He was able to come up with 3 incidents
in
that entire career where he'd actually been able to arrive on the scene and make a difference. Otherwise, they just arrive on the scene 5, 10, 15 minutes after the fact, take a report, basically. Amazingly small amount of violent crime in this country is prosecuted because there's just nothing to prosecute. There's nobody to arrest. The typical citizen is so overwhelmed. It's, well, it was a dude, it's black or white. Oh, I'm not sure. What do you look like? I don't know. So kind of hard to prosecute anybody based on that.
It was certainly sobering for sure. I would ask you, you exposed us to that, and it's not the first time I've seen or heard something like that clearly, but you exposed us to that content in an instructor level class.
Mm-hmm.
At what level would you expose your average student to something like that?
That's not for beginners, I don't think. One of the reasons we use that in instructor class is I want you as trainers to understand exactly what it is you need to get across to your students. We have some milder examples that still have negative outcomes, but aren't quite as gut-wrenching. But one of your jobs, you have to understand, to be an effective trainer, you're going to have to be something of a psychologist. I'm not a licensed psychologist, but I have a learner's permit. I've been observing and studying this for decades. And one of the things you're going to have to be able to do is break through that shell of false information around these people and try to get them oriented to what the actual world is like. Because for most of them, quite fortunately, they haven't been around violent crime. They haven't been around true violence. They don't know the depravity that exists out there and what people are willing to do for you just for entertainment purposes as much as anything else, or just out of class hatred or whatever it may be. Really doesn't matter why somebody does those hideous things to you. If they're done to you, they're done to you. But most people have a really hard time. Actually, your average person projects their values, their morals, and whatnot onto other people, and that's a horrible mistake. There are an awful lot of people out there who just simply don't share your worldview. And so why'd you kill the guy? The answer is why not? It's amazing. It's something that people who never worked in law enforcement or corrections just have no concept of. So one of the jobs of the trainers is to try to expose them to that, just to the degree they understand not everybody's like them, and they need to be mentally prepared to deal with somebody who is not like them. And the time to make that adjustment is not while somebody that's not like them is trying to kill them, cripple them, rape them, or whatever.
Yeah, there was an awful lot of in that example, in the one real grisly example, there was an awful lot of time spent wondering why.
Right, that's very typical. I've talked to an awful lot of violent crime victims over the years, and you ask them all the normal questions. What did that guy look like? Did you see a partner? Did you see a vehicle? Which way to go? But I made a point of asking them, especially with someone that lost consciousness at the scene. I like to refer to that as interviewing homicide victims. If somebody shoots you a couple of times in the chest, leaves you in the parking lot, and you bleed out, you lose consciousness and die, or you bleed out, you lose consciousness, you black out, but the paramedics get you, work on you till you get to the trauma center, and trauma center saves you, the last thought that went through your mind before the lights went out will be the last thought that went through your mind before the lights went out, whether you live or die. So when the ones that recover are interviewed, you're essentially interviewing homicide victims that can talk back to you. And when I would ask them what was the last thing that went through your mind before the lights went out, I would always get one of two answers. It was either, I couldn't believe this was happening to me, or why would somebody want to hurt me? Those are the two most common responses you'll get from unprepared people that hadn't really thought about it before the moment it happens. And instead of doing something constructive to save their life, they stand there with this irrelevancy of, why is this guy doing this? I haven't done anything to hurt this guy. Why is this guy trying to hurt me? Which is totally irrelevant. Or, I can't believe this is happening to me, because they've been fed this crap about violent crime being on the decline, which most certainly is not. And being presented with 12,000 murders instead of 40,000 murders, and numbers of that nature. So they've been lulled into this notion that, no, nothing bad will ever happen to you. And then when it does, then they're just shocked. They're stuck in that denial loop of, I can't believe this is happening to me. One of the things we found out on the range on day one was with just a moderate amount of training, people fire 4 or 5 rounds a second at the kind of distances we're talking about, 3, 4, 5 steps. I can't believe this is happening to me. It takes about 3 seconds. So you just frittered away your response time, the time you could have saved your butt in had you got yourself in gear. And you used up every bit of that available time with a total irrelevancy. Who cares? Now, why did the guy want to hurt me? Who cares? It's your day. It's your day at bat. It's just that simple.
It was interesting to see some of the varied responses, even in our group, to that kind of content. I'd like to think that everybody would come in on the same page, but clearly that's a false equivalency in and of itself, right?
As you noticed, there were wide. I think in your class we had 8 or 9 states represented, and a huge number of different training courses. This guy's been to 4 or 5, that guy's been to 4 or 5 different ones. This guy's been to 4 or 5 yet different ones. So a huge difference in training background, but also a huge difference in personal background. Some of these people are from affluent suburbs where they haven't seen much violent crime, whereas other people are from areas where they have dealt with violence. And some of them had actually been victimized, and that's what brought them into the fold, so to speak. So that difference in background has a lot to do with the difference in reaction to some of the stuff we use. And I'd be the first to admit some of the stuff we expose you to in that class is, you could say, heavy-handed, but it's because we want to get that point across to you. You've got to mentally prepare these people. Now, I've said this in your class, I've said it in speeches to civic groups and everybody else. We spend a fair bit of time trying to convince the other side that guns don't do anything bad. Guns don't cause crime, guns don't create violence, guns don't do anything bad. Well, what's the flip side of that? Guns don't do anything good. Guns don't do anything. Guns not going to protect you. Guns not going to make you safe. Guns not going to do a thing. If you don't get your head in gear, the gun's going to sit there in a holster while you're murdered, while you're raped, while you're robbed. It's not going to do you any good unless we get your head in gear. And a big piece of that is exposing people what actual violence is like, that is real, and what the results are if you don't get in gear. And that's why we do that, frankly. You've got to be able to get people out of that, oh, it'll never happen to me. You don't know that. It might happen to you on the way home. We had a guy engaged on the way home from class one night. In fact, we had a shooting yesterday involving a student.
Oh, geez.
Yeah, so you don't get to pick the day. I don't get to pick the day. I can't tell you you're not going to need a gun on your way home from wherever you are right now. I can't tell you that. You stop, you do nothing but stop at the stop and ride, get gas, or go and get a drink or whatever on your way home. There may be somebody in there sticking the place up and you walk in the door. There may be somebody on the parking lot that needs your car to get out of town because they got people looking for them with warrants. You don't get to pick that. You won't even be informed of that until the guy's standing there pointing a weapon at you and making demands. And that is not the time to start getting your head wrapped around violence.
No, certainly not. So on I believe it was Saturday evening, as Tim and I were driving away, we sat and we were talking about the level of statistics you keep on students who ended up in violent physical encounters, because it was interesting to us. And Tim and I made a bit of a morbid joke in one way in which we said, geez, we got to stop for gas at this shithole. And if we end up in something, we're going to get claimed by like 10 different instructors. Spalding's going to be there going, well, that was my guy because he moved when he shot him.
Right.
And Jedi's going to be over there going, yep, but he had a red dot, so that goes in my column.
Mm-hmm.
And, of course, it would be in your column because we were on the way home from your shit, right?
I don't care who gets credit for that.
No, clearly not. But one of the things
– what I care about is they win.
Absolutely. But one of the things that was interesting to us, and we stopped, we said, why the hell is nobody else doing this? I've not heard of anybody else.
I can tell you one big reason.
Okay.
Because we beat you over the head so incessantly about the necessity to actually carry your gun. So my students tend to actually have a gun when they're confronted. That's not true of a lot of others. Hell, I know instructors don't wear a gun off the range. What is the hardest single thing to get your newer students to understand?
Yep.
I don't care how many you own. I don't care what degree of skill you have with them. If they're all at home in the gun safe, they will do you no good on the Walmart parking lot. I would rather you have one gun and have it with you than have 20 at home and have none with you. And we beat people with that so relentlessly that my students tend to be armed. And when that happens, you tend to have more shooting. Plus, we got more students than anybody else. We rolled over the 50,000th student this year. That's a lot. Like I said, I've been doing this since 1975, but full-time since 96. When we had the school in Memphis for 18 years, we taught roughly 2,500 people a year. So that adds up. In fact, I think we had one yesterday. I'm not sure yet. I'm waiting on confirmation, but I think we had one in Memphis yesterday. But that's 800 miles away now, so it's a little harder for me to keep up with now.
So do you mind sharing the pluses and minuses in that? My understanding is it's something that, the high 60s have been victorious. And
right now we're 68 wins, 0 losses, and 3 forfeits. 68 wins is pretty self-explanatory. 0 losses, only 3 of our students in exchanges were wounded and they recovered. But 3 forfeits, which means I've had 3 students murdered, killed in separate street robberies. All 3 of them killed after they did what they were told, by the way. And the other common denominator among the 3 is none were armed. Almost 70 that had a gun won their fights. 3 didn't have a gun, died on the spot. I don't know about you, but I see a clue embedded in that. And that's why we beat into people so much. You've got to actually carry a gun. I've looked into those 3, and it appears that they just made a decision that morning. I'm not going to this place or that place. I'm not going to need a gun. They were wrong, and they pay with their life. If you wear your gun every day, religiously, day in and day out for the next 35 years, and you never have to pull it, what harm's been done? Nothing. But if you show up at your gunfight without it one time and you died, that's a pretty serious issue. One of those guys, contractor that rehabbed houses, and he's going to a nicer neighborhood, he thought, so I don't need a gun. And a carload of thugs drove by, saw him and one of his subcontractors standing in the driveway, got out and robbed him at gunpoint. Guy handed over his wallet and his cell phone and was standing with his hands in the air when one little asshole shot him in the face and killed him. He made a decision that morning that I'm only going to some houses in a nice neighborhood. There's no reason to wear a gun. And died that day. So that's the kind of thing we really harp on with our students. So as a consequence, as I said, A, we got an awful lot of students, and then B, they tend to be armed. So we're going to have more shootings. It's just that simple. And just the sheer number of 50,000. And I don't know how many we've had. We've probably had 3 or 4 times as many as we had. The number I give you are the ones that have been reported back and actually got a debrief on. A lot of people don't want any publicity when they're involved in something like that. They don't want the people at church to know about it. They don't want their employers to know about it. So they don't try not to tell anybody about it. And the one yesterday in Memphis, I'm not certain if that's one of my guys or not. I'm waiting on confirmation, but it hasn't been named publicly in the press or anything by the police because it looks like it's going to be a completely legitimate shooting. And he may want to keep it that way. So, like I said, we've probably got a lot more than I know about, but those are the numbers, the ones I know about.
So Tom, I'm curious, with those 60+ wins, has there been a recurring theme in those instances that we might be able to draw from, with respect to, setting, timing, location? Is there anything that you could share about those 60 plus that we could learn from?
You see a lot of the same things. One of the things I say in class is I would really like people to get away from using the term average in anything connected with what we do, because averages are wildly inaccurate. To have an average, you've got to have a little number and a big number and match them together. And the result oftentimes has no resemblance to reality. For instance, if you take two of our student-involved shootings, just two right off the top of the head, one involved one shot at 22 yards, one involved 11 shots at 4 yards. Well, if you average that, it's like 6 shots at 13 yards, which doesn't describe either fight at all. So I'd really like to get away from that. What I prefer to think in terms of, rather than average fight, what is a typical fight? Typical means if we look at, say, 50 of these, we see the same thing in 40 of them. What would you call it? That's a typical feature of those fights. So we see these certain things just over and over and over again. First one is a common fallacy that the most likely place you'd need your gun would be at home. That's silly. Home is one of the few places you actually have control over. We can talk in vague generalities about parking lot holdups and that sort of thing, carjacking, but you have no idea where they're going to occur. But most people know where they live. That is the only place you could be involved in an emergency where you know in advance where it's going to occur. So if you control your door construction and your locks and your alarm system and things like dogs that bark, then you have adequate warning to be able to take measures. So the fact is, less than 10% of our incidents have occurred in or around the home. That's again a place you can control the battle space before the battle and keep it from happening. Basically, in my house, I get steel doors, steel door frames, deadbolt locks, alarm system, and dogs. So, if somebody expended enough effort to get in the house, I'd be waiting on them by the time they got in. So we can control that to a large degree. But once you leave home, you have no control whatsoever. We live in an uncontrolled environment once we go outside. So about 90% of ours have occurred somewhere other than at home, which is why you got to wear your gun. It's not at home we're worried about so much when you are not at home. So about 90%, a little over, have occurred away from home. That away from home includes places just in our, that's convenience stores. It seems to be a pretty common thing. Grocery stores, Walmart parking lots, extremely common problem. Shopping mall parking lots. We had 3 shopping mall parking lots where there were probably several thousand people present, if you count present in the building when you're out on the parking lot being involved in a shooting. So the reality is your place of business, anywhere between your place of business and your home, where you stop, as I said, to get gas, to get coffee, to go in the grocery store and pick up a few items, all these places where these things frequently occur, where they typically occur. Distance, typically, not always by any stretch, but typically going to be somewhere around 3, 4, 5 steps, somewhere between 3 steps and the length of a long car. Typical American sedan is 16 feet long, so car length is roughly 5 yards. We see an awful lot there. In our culture, we tend to talk to strangers, people we don't know, at about 3 steps, and someone beyond about a car length is going to have a hard time robbing, raping, carjacking, kidnapping you. So that's where the majority of stuff happens. Not always. We've had 3 civilian student-involved shootings that were completely justified and absolutely necessary at 15, 17, and 22 yards. So it does happen, but those are, for some wonder, there's 3 out almost 70. So that's something not common. We've had 2 at contact distance. That's not common. And one of those was completely accidental, just absolutely accidental, wasn't intentional. But all the rest are in that 3, 5, 7 yard envelope of probability. Usually it's some form of an armed robbery. Not always, but that seems to be the most common reason for private citizens to get engaged. If you'll think about it, somebody sticking up your little mom and pop business, somebody robbing you on the Walmart parking lot, somebody taking your car at gunpoint, somebody kicking down your door at 3 in the morning with a pistol in their hand. These are variations of armed robbery. So armed robbery is probably the most common reason why private citizens would do a firearm. There are exceptions, of course. There have been a couple of actually targeted assaults where somebody's after a specific person among my student base. But again, that's rare. In one case, Woman talked her daughter into getting a restraining order against the daughter's boyfriend. The boyfriend knew the mom was the one that did that. So, middle of the night, he shows up to the house, kicks the door in with a gun in hand. Her husband winds up shooting the guy. That's a targeted assault. But that's like 2 out of almost 7. So, typically, it's been a carjacking attempt or armed robbery attempt or kidnapping attempt, something of that nature. So, if you ask me what is a typical civilian fight, it'll be 3, 5, 7 yards, 1 or 2 bad guys, some profit motivation like robbery or carjacking, and somewhere away from your home. So that's a typical civilian fight. That's what we see over and over and over and over.
So it's interesting that how many actually just roughly, I don't know if you had said this or not, how many of those were instructor candidates or instructor level students versus
I think maybe 2 or 3 that had actually been through the instructor course.
Okay.
Either had some other training, and quite a few of them had nothing but an 8-hour permit class. When we had the school in Memphis, Tennessee requires an 8-hour class, some classroom, some range, to get a carry permit, and we had the option in those days of meeting or exceeding the state required curriculum, so we exceeded the hell out of it. So people left a lot more prepared of an 8-hour class there than in a lot of places. And for a lot of them, that's the only training they'd had, actually. Some of the ones that really performed really exceptionally well had a good bit more training than that. I had the one guy that had to engage at 22 yards. He fired one shot and dead center of the sternum hit at 22 yards. And I checked, he had been to the range 9 times to practice in the 12 months prior to that shooting, and it had a couple of classes. He had a pretty good idea what he was doing. So when I say the majority of the people that got through it with an 8-hour class, I'm not saying that's what you should do. I'm saying they got away with it.
No, that makes sense. So Tim Kelly jumped into the chat and wants to know a little bit about the lineage of the instructor school. So why did you start training instructors, and how's that impacted your career?
That was a selfish decision at first. As I said, we opened the school in Memphis in '96. Had a couple of ranges, big classroom, a shop where we worked on guns and stuff, and a showroom, a pretty elaborate training center. But originally it was only me to teach. I thought I've got to have some help. Throughout that 18 years, we taught either 6 or 7 days a week. We would teach at night, Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday, Thursday, all day Saturday, Sunday, and then every other week an all-day class on Friday. So it was either 6 days or 7 days a week. And for the first couple of years, I taught every single one of those classes myself. And after the first year of that, I said, I've got to get some help. So I went to the local police departments, to their firearms training units, to try to recruit some part-time help. And I was just appalled. Some of them knew how to work their agency's issued gun, but nothing else. And one of the problems in the private sector is, of course, people show up with what?
Whatever they got.
Everything, right?
Yeah.
I've literally seen every kind of handgun made show up for a permit level class. And these guys didn't know how to work anything but their issued weapon, and frankly, they didn't know how to run them very well. None of them had any training whatsoever, other than in-house with their agency and the single NRA law enforcement firearms instructor course it took them to get their state certification. And so they had a very, very slim background. So I tried the federal agencies, got the same thing. They knew how to work their gun, and they knew how to teach their agency's methodology, but nothing else. So I kind of gave up on that. I had people come in and apply for jobs as trainers with typically no real background and no real skill whatsoever. They just thought it'd be neat to be a firearms instructor, I guess. So finally I came to the conclusion, if I'm going to have help, I'm going to have to create it. So I wrote a instructor training program and ran it by the state, got it approved as originally the only alternative to an NRA instructor credit to get your state license as an instructor in Tennessee. And as soon as I got that done, started teaching an instructor program originally once a year. Strictly, as I said, just to fill my own staff. We eventually had a staff of over 20 qualified instructors that about 6 or 8 of them were qualified as primary instructors, and the rest as assistant instructors, so that primary and a couple of assistants could run a class. And got the burden off of me, where I could back off that and start going back out on the road, that sort of thing. Once I had a competent core of cadre people at the range, which we had a very competent cadre. But as I said, I set the program up just to feed them into my own program for the first few years, and then word got around. We started getting people in from other areas and whatnot. We started in 1997 with that program, so it's been around for a while now. Now, I probably teach more instructor courses than any other single class. I do teach other classes. I've got 2 and 3 day pistol classes, 1, 2, and 3 day shotgun classes, shotgun instructor course, and so forth. But the pistol instructor program has pretty much become my primary focus over the last couple of years. One of the things I'm 68, I'm not going to do this forever. So I'm trying to make sure there's an adequate base of properly trained instructors to carry on. I'd like to see our doctrine continue after me, so I try to spread the word as much as we can. In a typical instructor class now, we'll have, wherever it is in the country, I'll have somewhere between 8 to 15 different states represented. And I think in yours, as I recall, there were, I think, 8 or 9 different states there. And I see that pretty much everywhere I go. And we've trained 1,100-ish people through the basic instructor development course now. We've got a 3-day instructor development program, which is what you went through. The next step is the advanced instructor, another 2 days, and then the last step is the master instructor, which is another 3 days. If you go through all 3 of those, that's 64 hours and about 3,000 rounds and 64 hours, 8 days of training. They make a pretty competent instructor in that amount of time. So the one you went through is what we think of as the first step, getting everybody kind of in line, give a good solid background. As you know, we went over a lot of how we got here, the why, not just the how, but the why. Why do we do it this way? What did we used to do? What does this accomplish the same task better? And that sort of thing. Try to make a better prepared instructor. One of the things I think an instructor should be able to do, if you tell a student to do something and they look at you and say, why? You should be able to give them some kind of coaching explanation, not because that's what the guys that came on before me said to do, or that's what the manual says, but be able to explain to them a legitimate reason why we do it that way. In the master instructor class, there's a 4-hour lecture on the history and development of firearms training from 1920 to 2020. It basically started what we think of as modern training in 1920. And from 1920 to 2020 is 100 years of very slow, gradual, painful progress to get to where we are today. One of the things that annoys me are people who have no concept of anything that's not on YouTube or didn't happen, in the last 2 years. Most of this work was done long before these people were born. None of this crap's new. This goes around about every 15 years in a cycle. I'm on my 3rd cycle now. And I think it's important for instructors, trainers, to have some knowledge of that background, who actually did the work, where did stuff actually come from, what is it based on, and have some understanding of the craft rather than just regurgitate what they've been told by somebody else.
It's interesting to see the depth of history just in the first 3 days. I had no idea you were in the Civil War, for example. So it was really nice of you to teach Civil War, gunfighting history. That was incredible.
My first issue revolver was Captain Ball.
So the instructor cadre seems to have kind of fanned out, and there seem to be enough master level folks and folks who have done some AIing and stuff for you, who I would presume intend to carry on the torch and continue the operation while you're wrestling golf balls out of alligators' mouths or whatever the hell you're going to be doing in retirement. So I asked Spalding this, and he gave me a otherwise crotchety answer. I'll ask you too. What in the hell are you going to do in retirement exactly?
I'm not going to retire real soon.
Right.
What the hell would I do? Sit around a gun range somewhere? My physical limitations are what will determine when I retire. My vision's going to absolute crap. My right hand, I had surgery on it in 2014, and it's damn near due for it again. So when I can't demo to my satisfaction, if you recall, I did a few demos in class that show important points. When I can't impress people with feats of pistol prestidigitation that border on the legerdemain anymore, I'll hang it up. But no, that may be a while yet.
Well, I won't blow any sunshine up your skirt, but it looks to me like you got another couple weeks anyway.
Yeah, I'm hoping. But like I said, I'm 68, and let's be realistic about this. I won't
Sure.
be good until I'm 80.
Sure.
The main thing is I don't want to be driving 40,000 miles a year plus a half dozen air trips when I'm 80.
Yeah, and I mean there are those in every craft, and you don't even have to stay inside firearms instruction. There are the guys that hung on just a little too long. That's obvious. In other sports or in other professions, and I can even think of some folks in the firearms community who might have stayed past their prime.
Mm-hmm.
And the only thing I would say is, from a true pure student's perspective, even if you're not the shooter you used to be, I can't imagine your teaching skill would degrade as fast as whatever physical skill would be.
Yeah.
And we in the community, we certainly don't want to lose you guys. If anything, we'll build we'll build like an old folks home somewhere where we'll keep all the knowledge, and then like the Jedi Knights or whatever, just every once in a while we'll come ask a question.
Home for aging gunmen.
We'll duct tape a broomstick to your back and weekend at Bernie's you, Tom.
One thing you got to remember, to get 50 years of experience takes 50 years.
Yeah.
So I'm not going to surrender that amount of knowledge anytime soon. I'll keep teaching as long as I'm physically capable of doing what I do. I'll probably cut back significantly after I say turn 70, which is like 2 years from now. But driving 40,000 miles a year in a pickup truck takes toll on you, and 150 nights a year in a hotel takes toll on you. Hell, I'm sick of hotels, but there's not any really other way to do it. So there I go again. Like I said, in about 10 days, I'll head out again for a 3-week marathon.
I'm in my 30s, and I don't want to drive 40,000 miles a year.
Yeah. A lot of other trainers tell me, I don't see how you put up with that, but I hate it. It's not that I hate anything about flying. It's that I hate the logistical aspect of it. Back of my truck, I drive a Toyota Tundra with a work cover and a extra floor space in the back, two levels, in other words. And like for this next trip, I got 4 separate classes to do. I've got an instructor class, then a 2-day pistol class, then a 1-day shotgun class, then another instructor class. So imagine the amount of crap I have to carry for that. And to fly those, I have to ship all that crap. I have to hope it gets there in usable condition and on time. I have to rely on the host for things like projector and screen and whatnot, which you cannot rely on people for. So I put all that crap in the truck. I know when I get where I'm going, I've got what I need. I'll have all the targets, I'll have all the workbooks, I'll have the written tests, I'll have the projector, I'll have the screen, I'll have the stuff I need. Because I learned a long time ago, you simply can't assume any of that stuff's going to be where you're going to wind up. And if you fly 1,000 miles from home and there's no projector and there's no screen and there's no this and there's no that, you're stuck. So I prefer driving on at least my own side of the continent simply for the logistical aspect of it. It just makes me better prepared to put on a quality class when I get there than shipping stuff and hoping it's there and unloading it at the last minute and find out crap they shipped the wrong manuals and that kind of stuff. So driving that much is a pain sometimes, but the flip side is I get to see the whole country when I have time, which I will have on this next trip. I'll have plenty of time between classes. I stay off the expressway and state highways and actually see the country. I enjoy that. If all you watch is the news, you get a really distorted country what the United States is like. Outside of the cesspool big cities, the country is actually a pretty nice place with a lot of nice people. And I get to do that. I enjoy that aspect of it a lot. This is still the best country in the world. people that don't like this country, I really wish they would go somewhere else just for a little while and come back. I've traveled overseas a bit, and I can tell you that you don't really appreciate the U.S. till you go somewhere else and anywhere else, including the so-called developed world. You come back here with a completely different appreciation of this country. It's the best country in the world.
Yeah, amen to that, man. I'll tell you what, nobody. You see those guys coming home for the first time that will literally bow down and kiss American soil, and everyone kind of, people that haven't been there don't quite understand it. But
you don't have to go to a war zone of the third world. Just go to Europe.
Yeah,
no air conditioning, no ice, no nothing. You come back here, Jesus, at least I can sleep without sweating.
Yeah, that's true too.
So, it's amazing.
Yeah. So, Tom, before we get into our next question, we do have another question from the chat. One of our followers, MG Butson, has asked, hearkening back to the settings of at least the statistics that you have, either from your own classes or from your own students, or even just those that you've studied. How many of those incidents are you aware of happen in or around a church or a school? Some we might even be able to argue that those are, while not as intimately familiar as a home might be, are still pretty routinely visited places.
Actually, I wish I'd known that question was coming up. I'd pull the file for you. I went to a national church security conference a couple years ago. Most people would be absolutely amazed at the number of incidents there are. You don't hear about the vast majority of them. Churches have a vested interest in keeping that quiet. So they're literally in 10-year period they looked at, there were literally hundreds of fatalities and many hundreds of serious injuries and violent incidents. Not all what you might think. Some of them religiously oriented, some of them robberies of the congregation. In the smaller churches, it's not terribly uncommon. A couple of guys go in during the service and rob everybody that's sitting there in the pews, rob the church of the collection plate, that sort of thing. There are surprising number of these things where a woman, for instance, is getting counseling from the pastor. The husband takes that as interference in the marriage. He goes to the church to speak to the pastor. There was an amazing amount of violent crime connected with churches that most people are just simply not aware of. They just never heard of.
Wow. But that's even, I'll be honest with you, Tom, that's even kind of surprising to me, wow.
Yeah, the numbers were pretty shocking, actually. And it's on the increase, just like all other societal violence is.
Who compiled those numbers? Which source was that?
That was a national church security conference I was at. Gotcha. They do that every year. There's one going on this year, but I won't be at it. But pretty interesting stuff.
Let's see what else we got in the chat here. We got Lee Weems is talking about barbecue in South Dakota.
Yeah.
So
we taught in South Dakota last year. Lee went along with me, help out with class, and we were between Rapid City and Sturgis. And there's a expressway exit middle of nowhere with two little buildings there. One's a truck repair shop, and the one next to it said barbecue. So we looked at each other and said, "Oh, what the hell?" So we went in there. Turns out the same guy owns both. He makes his living off the truck repair shop, but his passion is barbecue. He used to be one of the traveling competitors and had some of the best brisket either of us had ever had in this little hole in the wall in nowhere, South Dakota. So we told the guy, we both live a couple thousand miles from here, but we'll be back. And so we set up a class there this year just so we could go back. So last month we were back out there teaching again and made it back to that little place. And guy was kind of surprised to see us, but we told you we were coming back. Here we are. So that was the kind of highlight of that trip. Lee and I judge cities and towns around the country by the quality of their steaks and barbecue. If they don't have good steaks and barbecue, I know they're teaching there.
I like it. You're a well-respected firearms trainer when you can fill a class just so you can go get some barbecue.
There you go. There's an example of something that's really frustrating. Last year when we did that class, the class was supposed to be for South Dakota law enforcement firearms instructors. And an individual underwrote the entire cost of the class, so there would be no fee whatsoever to the officers. Civic-minded guy coughed up $10,000, said, "Here, I want you to do a class for South Dakota officers. My only requirement is that they've got to be a South Dakota peace officer, firearms instructor. Well, we were not able to fill the class that way. So I said, okay, well, my only stipulation is they've got to be a sworn officer from somewhere. It's going to be a firearms instructor. So we opened it up. So we had guys from South Dakota, one from Colorado, one from Nebraska, and one from, I think, Utah. But we still weren't able to fill the class. It still had several seats that went unfilled for a free class. That's how hard it is to get people to come. And that was a basic instructor class. So we went back this year and did the next step up, the advanced instructor class. And again, half the people in that class were from somewhere else. They flew in to take it there because it's in a scenic, nice area. August in South Dakota is beautiful, and they could do like I do a little sightseeing while they're there. So about half the class was from somewhere else. It's just that hard to fill training.
Yeah. It's a little heartening to hear that you have the same problems I do in that arena. It's unreal to me when people in the social media is one thing. There's a million Instagram DMs and a million Facebook messages and a million this and a million that. When are you going to do this? When are you going to do that? When are you going to do this? Mm-hmm. Here's the dates. Here's the times. Here's the price. Here's the location.
Oh, no, I can't. I've got to rearrange the sock drawer and wash the cat. I can't do that.
Yep. There's always something. It's amazing. So let me ask you a little different flavor of a question. What is something that you see students, either instructor level students or regular students, focusing on that you don't put much emphasis into? In other words, where are people wasting their time?
One of those is chasing the splits. You don't need 11 splits in a fight. You don't need 20 splits in a fight, for that matter. One of the problems with that is you get in the habit of shooting faster than you can process information. And that leads to more shots than are necessary in somebody, which leads to legal issues you wouldn't have had otherwise, and that sort of thing. I think be a little circumspect about that. If you can reliably hit at 0.25, 0.30, work on something else. Okay. I would rather see you work more on a more efficient, fast, and reliable presentation from concealment than your split time, because no matter what your splits are, if you can't get the thing out. If you're involved in something where you got to use that gun to save your life, you may or may not have to shoot it. You may or may not have to reload it. You may or may not have to fix a malfunction, but you got to get it out. So we know that's going to happen. So that's a critical skill, and most people don't put no time into it. You probably saw this in your class. On the first day, see people take 2.5 seconds to get the damn gun out. Well, you don't have 2.5 seconds to get a gun out. If you can't get the gun out and get to a first shot to kind of engagement distance, if we're talking about 3, 5, 6 yards, if you can't get the gun out and get your first hit in about the second half, you're kidding yourself. Where the probably don't really need it out. I'd like to see a lot more effort put into that. As you know, we don't see a lot of reloads in real fights. You need to know how to reload, but trying to chase the mythical 2-second reload is a competitive issue, not a street issue. I caution people, don't go around saying I'm opposed to competition. I am not in any form opposed to competition. As I said, I've been instrumental in setting up 2 of the major types of pistol competition. But I'm able to separate those in my head. These are things we want to do on the range in competition. These are things we want to do shooting for blood. And they're not always the same. In competition, we always have to try to shave off every millisecond we can, because tiny increments of time make a big difference. If something costs you 1/10 of a second over 15 stages, that's a second and a half. But 1/10 of a second in the fight's not even detectable. Without an electronic timer, nobody even knows the 1/10 of a second difference. And you don't see electronic timers in fights at all. There is a timer, they're reprogramming it, but it's a beep. So that 1/10 of a second difference is not going to make a damn bit of difference in a real fight, but it adds up in a 14, 15 stage match. And that's where the big difference is. And that's where a split would make a difference. Split time makes a difference when you're talking about 200, 240 shots in a state level match. But you're not going to fire 240 shots in a fight. We're talking about 3, 4, 5, 6 shots. So I would rather see you put a lot more time into a good, solid concealed presentation, because the gun needs to be concealed until you need it. Then you have to be able to access it pretty rapidly. So I'd rather see more effort put into that and less into things like 2-second reloads and 15 splits and things that really don't make much difference in the real world. The other thing that just bugs the crap out of me is people showing up with gear that doesn't work. This is not South Africa where you get one gun on your permit and that's it. You can buy all the guns you want in this country still. And it baffles me that people, particularly at the trainer level, will put up with a gun that doesn't work. As we went over in class, showed you some examples of in class, it's a lot more likely to gag in a fight than it is in a training environment where you've got a clean gun, clean ammo, clean magazines, stand on your hind legs on a clean range, and none of that may apply in a fight. So if your gun gags in a training environment, it's probably not going to work in a fight. And it baffles me that people put up with that. I see people in class all the time with guns that don't run. Fix it or get rid of it. Get another one. You don't bet your life on a gun that doesn't run like a sewing machine.
So, as Tim is wont to do, he's asking another high-level leadership question. For us younger generation of shooters and instructors, what do you feel we need to do to help guide the industry in a more competent direction? How do we set a better example? How do we make the best out of our 40 or 50 years in this business?
Well, I think he's probably already answered his own question. He said, set an example. Go to other people's training, even if you think you have things figured out. I've been teaching professionally now for 45 years. In February, I finally got a chance to take one of Dave Spalding's classes. I've known Dave for decades, but all of us that teach for a living have the same schedule, essentially. If you take out the Christmas and the Thanksgivings and the Mother's Days and the 4th of July and all the other holidays that nobody will show up to gun school for, there's about 30 weekends a year. And all of us teach all of those. So it took me years to get into a Dave Spalding class, but I did in February. I try. I don't always succeed, but I try really hard to take 2 classes a year from somebody unconnected to my organization. And I think, as Tim said, that's setting an example. I would like to see all trainers do that. So many trainers out there haven't been to a class as a student in 10, 15, 20 years. Well, guess what? Stuff's changed. Okay? When I started out in the late 70s, you had 1911 if you had an auto, period. One guy in 1,000 might show up with a Browning high power, but if it was an auto, it was 1911. Glocks didn't exist. C's didn't exist. M&Ps didn't exist. None of the stuff that we take for granted today existed in the 70s and 80s. Glocks came to this country in 86. Browning imported a few SIG pistols with their name on them in 86, but they couldn't give them away because he had the European Hill clip magazine latch on them, so canceled the contract. SIG moved the button up to where we think it should be at 86 or 7, started importing them into this country. M&P and H&Ks came along much, much after that. So if all of your training as a student took place prior to that, that's kind of out of date. When I was a pup, we were taught nobody teaches that anymore. Nobody, Gunsight doesn't teach that. It doesn't require that. We used to have all the time, you don't go to Gunsight, it requires you to Weaver and have a 1911. No, they don't. I've got a number of pictures recently from Gunsight with the entire firearm line with not a 1911 on them and not anybody shooting from Weaver. The guys that teach there have evolved just like everybody else has. That's any good. So one of my first questions to an instructor would be, when's the last time you took a class as a trainer? As a student from another trainer. So I think Tim already answered this question by saying we need to set an example and require that of other people. In other words, I won't refer somebody to a person I know hadn't had the classes himself in 20 years because I know he's stagnant, outdated, probably full of shit, basically. So if we set that example and we require people to do more, be better, there's not any governing body, nor will there ever be on the private sector side of it. And we sure as hell don't want the government running it. The government could screw up a mayonnaise sandwich. So we sure as hell don't want them doing that. But there's not any enforceable way for the private sector to monitor or police itself because it's purely a voluntary system. There's not any requirement to be a member of any organization, to be a trainer. Anybody can hang out a shingle and say, I am an instructor. So it's a simple matter of self-policing by setting a standard and shunning people who don't want to be serious about this. People with nothing but a 2-day NRA pistol instructor course should not be teaching self-defense shooting to people. They might teach somebody how to operate a pistol without shooting themselves, which is the goal of that class. But a lot of people don't realize that. They take that class and say, oh, no, I'm going to teach gunfighting. Maybe not. So we need to be serious about shunning people who refuse to do the right things and encourage and support and refer back and to each other to people who are in fact serious about the art, the craft. It's not just, it shouldn't, to be any good at this, really, it's not a job. It's more like a calling. I live for the 4 or 5 times a year somebody comes up to me, gives me a big teary hug and says, dude, you saved my life. And I can sit down and tell me what happened. That's why I do this. I don't have to travel like I do to make a living, but I do it to get the word out to the people who need it.
Outstanding. Well, I'd be remiss if I didn't bring up shotguns and have you on this podcast. So can you give us like a Clint Smith style shotgun rant on why shotguns are? Look at him laughing. Can you do one of those for us, please?
No, I'm not even going to attempt to do Clint. I've known Clint since the 70s. I don't do Clint, but no, I'll give you some things about why you might want to consider the shotgun. First thing is shotgun is the single most effective shoulder weapon that the typical person's got access to. One good solid hit with a shotgun is typically it. I've investigated a fair number of shotgun shootings over the decades, and I've only found a tiny handful that required 2 hits. And in every case, that's because the first hit was damn near a miss. It's a peripheral hit. But I center somebody in the chest with a load of buckshot, and it's over. Like that. Which brings me to the next thing. The carbine guys like to point at shotgun's capacity or lack thereof. What did I just say? One shot with a shotgun typically fixes the problem. Okay. So essentially, a serving with a shotgun is 1 round. With a carbine at CQB distances anyway, your typical serving is 5, 6, 7 rounds. And I know that a 30-round magazine is not a 30-round magazine; it's a 28-round magazine. So how many 7-round servings are in a 28-round magazine? 4. My shotgun has a 6-shot magazine. One the pipe's 7, so I've got more servings than a guy with a fully loaded carbine does. It's not that hard to reload. We teach people how to do that in a 1-day class quickly and efficiently. Couple of nice things about it. The first one is, it's, as I said, it's not terribly limited when you think about one shot being as devastating as it is. Secondly, we can bring people to a level of competency with a shotgun in a very short period of time. When we're talking about home defense, business defense, we're not talking about slug select drills in 100 meters and this kind of crap. That's not involved. What we're talking about is being able to run a gun efficiently in a home defense or business defense scenario. We do that routinely in a day in less than 150 rounds of ammo. The other thing is a lot of times not really given enough mark. Political ramification. You shoot somebody with an evil black rifle, shoot somebody with Uncle Joe's bird gun, who's going to be viewed more favorably by both the authorities and if it ever got to it by a jury. Everybody on the jury's uncle's got a shotgun in the closet, but most people don't have an evil black rifle laying around. That's a consideration. It's not a huge consideration. It's something to kind of tuck away in the back of your mind that if I shoot somebody with it, what they look like. And you have to bear in mind when we're talking about defensive weapons, what we got them for? Because why not shoot somebody with it? First thing I tell people when they contemplate carrying a pistol, I say, why do you want to carry a gun? And they start giving these bullshit euphemisms like personal defense and family security and all that sort of thing. And those are euphemisms. You're trying to dance around the subject. I carry a pistol every day because I might run into somebody and have to shoot. If I have to shoot somebody, damn well better have a gun. So it's really that simple. Okay? Don't want to shoot anybody. Not looking to shoot anybody. But I'm not going to stand there and let somebody murder me. I'm not going to stand there and let somebody cripple me for the rest of my life. I'm not going to stand there and let somebody kill my wife in front of me because I can't do anything about it. So I'm armed so that I have a vote. I'm armed so I have some say in my own destiny. And the the stark realization people have to come to is that's, you don't carry a gun to make you feel better. You carry a gun because you might have to shoot somebody with it. And if we have to shoot people, nothing beats a shotgun for the kind of distances we're talking about on unarmored, lightly clothed people, which is what we're normally dealing with, at home defense distances. Nothing beats a 12-gauge shotgun with load buckshot in it. And we can show you a lot of historical references to that, as well as a lot of current day situations and examples of it. Charles Askins was in the Border Patrol out of El Paso for the 10 years of Prohibition, was involved in literally hundreds of shootings. It's thought that he killed well over 100 men. And he was 3 times national pistol champion. But if you read his 1939 book about gunfighting, it says there rather plainly, forget about a pistol if you're going to shoot people. Go get a 12-gauge shotgun, fill your pockets with buckshot, and go to work. I said, the pistol's for the times we don't expect to fight, and we don't really need a gun, so we just carry a pistol. If you need a gun, go get a shotgun full of buckshot. And if somebody's been in that experience, I would tend to listen to him a little bit, and then I could give you countless more examples.
So, in that vein, given your extensive experience and your time in the community, we'll say, you've seen the evolution of training to where, if you had an auto, it was a 1911, the coming and going of the Weaver stance of shooting. Mm-hmm. We see a constant attempt to develop and I'm using the term loosely, but improve firearms technology. Mm-hmm. We go from, at least what we can perceive as improvements, right, from the 1911s to, your various striker-fired platforms. Mm-hmm. So this is kind of a two-part question, with the first one being optional. So the optional one is, where do you see the development of firearms technology going? The second part of this would be, and what I'm really curious to get your input on is, what are some things about firearms that might have gone away that you'd like to see come back with regards to the overall platform?
The first question is, I think we're probably really close to plateauing on personal pistol design. I'm not sure we can do a whole lot more than we can right now. We've got high capacity, lightweight, easy to shoot, reliable handguns right now, which pretty much checks all the boxes. A lot of what we see beyond that is probably just going to be cosmetic if you get right down to it. I do think optics in some form will become standard, more or less. Eventually, probably come from the factory, but that's eventually. That's not anytime real soon. The gun manufacturers are very resistant to change because of cost. Change equals cost, and they hate that with passion. All the big gun makers are publicly held corporations. They cannot waste money. They have to make a profit. If something costs them $1 a gun, they make $1 million of that gun in a year. That's $1 million. The layman doesn't think like that. So, well, why don't they improve this, or why don't they change that? Just changing the tooling to make a minor change in the way the rear sight shape, for instance, costs them tens of thousands of dollars for the tooling. So they're not going to do that. When you suggest something like that, they look at you like you're crazy. You realize, of course, that we're selling these faster than we can make them. Why on earth do we want to spend money to change something when we're making them faster than we can, or we're selling them faster than we can make them? And you got to admit that from their perspective, that makes 100% sense. So imagine what the cost of the milling and the sight itself for all guns to come from the factory with an optic on. Imagine what that cost would be. And right now, they don't have an incentive to do that. I'm not going to name a name, but one of the factories sent a guy to my school to teach an armor class, and I asked him about the really crappy trigger system on his gun at the time. And first thing, he made sure there was nobody in the room but the two of us. And he said, "We've looked into that, but to do what you want us to do would cost about $15 a gun. We make $1 million a year, that's $15 million. We simply can't do that. And the reality is, not one buyer in 1,000 knows the difference. So the one that knows the difference will buy the Apex parts. It's not my problem." Now, if you'll think about it from his perspective, he is absolutely right.
Absolutely, yeah.
So, yeah, we'd like to see him come from the factory with a better trigger pull. they don't care, and they have no reason to care. That's the reality of it. So if you're a serious shooter and you buy the gun and you put better sights on, you have the trigger cleaned up, you do this, you do that. That's just part of the process of buying the gun. The way I see it right now, when you buy a modern gun, you're almost buying a kit. You could probably use it in its current fashion, but it'd be a whole lot better if you let somebody actually finish it up for you. But again, like he said, not one person 1,000 knows the difference. Not one person 1,000 ever going to shoot the thing. Every time you put it in the socket drawer, it's nothing more than a rabbit's foot. It's a magic charm. So they take it and put it in the drawer. When we did those thousands and thousands of permit classes, people would come in with their firearm in the box it came in. If you've been around like I have for decades, you recognize from the box what era the gun's from. And I'd see a gun in the box, and I'd know personally looking at it because it's 40 years old. So I asked the guy, how long you had that gun? So I bought it in the 60s. You ever fired it? No. And that's typical. It's been in the closet until something scared him bad enough to get it out and go to class. And that's true of the vast majority of the guns that are sold in this country. So to the gun maker, it's incredibly stupid to suggest we spend more money on something we're already selling faster than we can put together. So I don't foresee any big quantum leaps forward there, and I don't expect the optic to be a factory standardized optic for a pretty good while, because it's going to add a good bit of cost until people actually demand that, quit buying iron-sighted guns and only buy optic guns. They're not going to make that change, and that's not going to happen anytime soon. One of the major drivers is cost, both for the private individual and for agency sales. An awful lot of agency sales are not based on what's the best gun for our troops. It's who got the low bid this time. Typical large agency changes guns every 10 years to avoid wear on them. And it's typically a low bid process within certain parameters. It's got to be able to do this. It's got to be able to do this. It's got to hold this many rounds. It's got to be this caliber. It's got to do this or that. But then the bottom line is the bottom line. How much do these things cost? Because when you're buying 10,000 units, that makes a difference. Particularly, I think, with all of this movement to cut police budgets, you really will be looking at, this bid's $1,000 more than that bid. We got to go with this. So I really don't foresee any huge changes. I think the optic issue will be a gradual thing over maybe the next decade, maybe 10 years from now. An optic will be standard. I don't know about 2 years from now, but maybe more like 10. And really, given that ammunition stays the way it is, I don't know that we can actually do more than we got now as far as lightweight, concealable, reliable, really user-friendly handguns. Probably over the last 100 years, I probably got that winded down a good bit.
Right.
What was the second part of your question?
With the evolution, of the various platforms, right, or at least the popularity and the gravitation to those, what are some elements or aspects of perhaps weapons of the past, maybe from the 1911 line or the high powers, those tried and true weapons of yesteryear? What are some of the concepts or technologies or features of those would you like to see maybe come back or revisited with the modern stuff?
Not really. I think we've moved forward. The 1911's 110-year-old design. Technology's changed a bit in 110 years. We didn't have airplanes when the 1911 was designed. Between 1903 and 1903, 1905, 1907, 1909, 1910, and then the 1911. We didn't have airplanes yet at that point. Now we put people in space. We're communicating by telegram. Okay, it's a completely different world. When the 1911 was designed, didn't have Social Security and didn't have retirement accounts. People that worked at Colt worked there for 40, 50, 60 years until basically they died. You might have a guy sitting there at the bench assembling these pistols that have been sitting there for 30 years. So skilled craftsmanship, hand labor was cheap and plentiful, but automation was rare and expensive. We have the exact opposite now. Automation is plentiful and cheap, and skilled hand labor is extremely expensive and rare. When you buy a Nighthawk, for instance, 1911, you're buying somebody taking a basic 1911 and fitting it the way a Colt worker in 1920 would have done it. And you're paying, but what it means though is that is how much that hand labor costs today, which is why you can't mass produce a gun like that. I have a Colt commercial 45 made in 1927, and it's the equivalent of a semi-custom gun today. But you can't do that anymore. Colt is not going to sell many 1911s for $4,500 a piece. It's a niche market. So, to be quite frank, it's an obsolete gun now. I know I'm going to get hate mail for that. Because of the things I just mentioned. I think the modern, I don't want to retrograde from where we are now. We have the best guns that have ever been in existence anywhere in the world. Combine lightweight, high capacity, shootability, accuracy, reliability. I don't care if we're talking about an M&P, HEK, Glock gun, 33, whatever. They all meet essentially the same requirements because they're all set up for the same bids. So they pretty much equivalent guns, matter of personal preference which one you use. But they're being able to make something like that and sell it for $400 or $500 as opposed to $4,000 or $5,000 is the difference between a modern design and a 110-year-old design.
Right.
Frankly, I don't want to see us go back where we were. I changed from 1911 15 years ago to a Glock to get a lighter platform with more BBs in it. I don't want to go back the other direction.
Fair. And you already beat my next question by me asking you what's in your concealed carry rig. But
my everyday carry is a Glock 17. It's been worked over by Ben Simonson at Boresight Solutions in Miami. It gives me, I carry 2 spare magazines out of habit because when I carried 1911 for decades, I carried 2 spare magazines. That gives me 52 rounds. If I can't fix it in 52 rounds, I give up. I quit. And it's a fairly lightweight, fairly compact setup. I carry it every day, just casually. And I've got a Glock 19, hardly ever used for anything. I've got a Glock 48 specifically for wearing a suit. I've got 34s of a 41, several other things, but my everyday is a Glock. In fact, I have 2 absolutely identical Glock 17s. You wouldn't be able to tell them apart. I can only tell them apart because they're my children, but I have 2 identical ones. One's my training practice gun, and the other's a gun I carry every day because I don't want to put wear and tear on the one I carry every day. That's something else I wish more people understood. A gun is a machine. It has parts wear.
Mm-hmm.
Eventually, it's going to fail. So I don't shoot my carry gun, but a couple times a year. I requalify with it a couple times a year. And then clean it up, put fresh ammo in it, and carry on. My practice and training gun gets kicked around and demo in class constantly and bounces around all over the country. So that's the gun I use on the range. But as I said, you couldn't tell them apart laying them side by side on the table. You wouldn't know which was which. So you got one to carry and not accumulate wear and tear on it, and one to demo with it is identical. So when I practice with the training gun, it's exactly like practicing with my carry gun. Same sight, same trigger, same everything.
Outstanding.
I like it. Well, as we are wont to do on this podcast, we made an hour and a half feel like 5 minutes, and I could. This is kind of like a little like sitting around a campfire with Grandpa. I could just go get another drink and keep listening. But at some point, I guess what we'll just have to do is invite you back on for a part 2, and we can learn a little more from you.
On the rare occasions that I'm not on the road, you're welcome to give me a shout.
There we go. I love it. So that being said, first and foremost, thank you so much for your time and your willingness to come do things like this. You certainly, you're not here to promote your business. You're here to help folks. You don't need our help selling gun classes. So we very much appreciate that. We always say that time is the most valuable commodity somebody can give you. So you gave us and our audience an hour and a half, and you never know who that might reach or who it might help. So very much appreciate that. Real quick, just for those playing the home game, if you've been under a rock for the last hour and a half, this gentleman's name is Tom Gibbons, and he runs Rangemaster firearms training. And if you're a fledgling firearms instructor or just a regular self-defender, you should probably go look him up before he decides to stop doing this anymore. The best number one thing we could say about a trainer is would I send my wife or my family member to them? And yeah, hell yeah, absolutely. I send my wife to you in a heartbeat, although I'm afraid to because she'll come back with yet more ways to make fun of me than she already has. That's a little scary. That being said, Tom, we've taken to doing something to round out the show, which is to ask you to pick a charity. Do you have a favorite charity in mind that you'd like to pick?
I do. I really, really strongly recommend people donate to the Second Amendment Foundation. They have really led the charge, and a lot more so than the NRA for the last decade or so. Most of these federal court decisions that have really boosted our side have been funded and spearheaded by the Second Amendment Foundation. They had several really, really important victories for our ability to be able to protect ourselves, defend ourselves and our families. So it's a nonprofit organization that simply promotes gun rights. They do a lot of lobbying. They also fund a lot of the lawsuits like Heller and so forth have been primarily because of the Second Amendment Foundation's efforts. So I'd really like to see them supported. So if you want to donate to somebody, let's make it them.
Awesome. Well, in that vein, we will be donating the proceeds from whatever T-shirt sales come in for the next couple of weeks to the SAF. And we'll have links to, well, first of all, we'll have links to Tom and Range Master and all that good stuff in the description, as well as to the SAF where you can donate if you don't want to buy a T-shirt. We save these for the end because we don't want to make people listen to a bunch of ads in the beginning because that's just not I always fast forward through them on everybody else's shows. That being said, we wouldn't have what we have here, number one, without students and followers. So thank you all so much for your time and your effort listening to these things. And we do have a couple of affiliates and sponsors that we owe a lot of gratitude to. One of them being Limitless Laser Works here in Carlisle, Pennsylvania. If you're looking for some stippling work or some undercuts or some other high quality modifications to be made to your defensive firearm for utilitarian purposes. No, we're not doing skulls and crossbones and whatever the hell else. Chad and his team over there are actually doing utilitarian upgrades to defensive firearms. Look them up. Of course, we've got folks over at Right On Optics. Both TJ and I are proud members of the Right On Optics Pro staff. So if you're considering those optics for your new handguns and all these fancy whiz bang things that shoot 1,000 yards for some reason, I have no idea why you would need to shoot 1,000 yards.
They're called rifles, Kent.
No, I don't know what those do. I don't know why we have them. I just. What's that, Tom?
Because it's fun.
It is fun. It is absolutely fun. I'm just terrible at it. That being said, if you need some quality glass for the top of something that goes bang, look up Right On Optics. And if you're looking for a place to buy Right On Optics, greenmountaindefense.com/affiliate-links is where you can find all of the various folks like Primary Arms who have welcomed us into their affiliate program where you can buy a little bit of gun merchandise and we get a little bit of credit for that. There's a hamster in TJ's basement running on a wheel. Every once in a while, we need to feed that little sumbitch cheese or there will not be a podcast. So please go buy some non-existent ammo and non-existent gun parts online at those affiliates. We're going to have to get some other affiliates outside the gun. We should call Yeti Coolers back and see if they still want to talk about cooler sales or some other stupid nonsense.
Well, you've got connections. We can sell tires and shit.
Yeah, tires maybe. I don't know. We'll sell something to keep this thing going. Of course, if you're looking for quality firearms training, here we go. We got 52 episodes of these. 30 some of them are firearms trainers. If you want to know who we recommend, they probably have been on our podcast, right?
Mm-hmm.
So go check that out. We would be remiss if we didn't mention Gunset Training in Ohio. We'd be remiss if we didn't mention Apache Solutions in North Carolina. I would be remiss if I didn't mention my local friendly competitor, Phil Groff at Figure Training. If for whatever reason your firearms instructor cannot recommend you other instructors, that's probably a pretty detrimental clue. It's time to start seeking some other info elsewhere. So if you're hearing the sound of my voice and you're one of these new gun owners, or you're a long-time experienced gun owner who's finally looking to take this seriously, and you're in some corner of the country, slingandleadpodcast@gmail.com, and we will refer you somewhere. As a matter of fact, it looks like the guys from Apache are referring somebody to you, Tom. So look at that. That's cool. And Trey over there from Apache is wondering who's coming to see me. Yes, I do teach firearms classes. If you'd like sarcasm and humor mixed in with, shooting more gooder, come to Green Mountain Defense, greenmountaindefense.com/training. TJ, what else you got, man?
Well, guys, that about covers it. Of course, we would further be remiss as your friendly neighborhood Second Amendment podcast if we did mention a couple of the other charities that Kent and I do hold very dear. Of course, we want to give a shout out to Hold My Guns. Check them out at their GoFundMe, GoFundMe.com/HMG.org, or you can visit their website, holdmyguns.org, for more information. Rachel's Rest is another fantastic organization that was brought to our attention. Absolute fantastic cause. Highly encourage you all to go check that out. Links not only for Rangemaster, but for Tom's charity of choice, the Second Amendment Foundation, will be posted in the description to this YouTube video as well as our podcast episodes. While we always encourage you to become responsible and well-educated self-defenders, we have to also mention medical. Be sure to head on over to darkangelmedical.com. Use code BB15. That's Bravo 15 at checkout. We get nothing back from that, but you'll get 15% off your order. Just do us the favor and post a little note in your order comments saying that the Sling'N Lead podcast, not the Second Amendment. I wish the Second Amendment sent you, but no, it was just us. Let them know that the Sling'N Lead podcast sent you, so Carrie knows that we're showing him some love. Kent has already mentioned our affiliates link down in the description below. You can also reach out to us on Facebook at the Sling'N Lead podcast. Folks, that does it for us here tonight and this week. We look forward to seeing you next week. Tom, once again, sir, thank you very much for your time. It has been an honor and a privilege to have you on the show, and we look forward to having you back.
Thanks. Look forward to it.
Absolutely.
Charlie, if you're watching live, Charlie, I think TJ had a stroke. Go downstairs and check on him.
I smell toast. It's been a long couple weeks, man. Get off my back. But that's it for us here, folks. God bless you all. Take care of each other and get out and shoot.
Bye, everybody. Love you. Thanks.